Hello and welcome everybody to our third RQAP credential study group for us working for the GLP credential. I'm Brendan Highland. So as I said, this is going to be the third. Today we're going to talk about compliance assessment, inspecting, and what to inspect. First, I'm going to just go quickly through. I know you've all probably seen these slides before, but it's worth just reminding ourselves some tips and helpful hints, things to know about writing this exam. It is a challenging exam. There's 165 multiple choice questions in 3.5 hours. 15 of those questions are not scored. This is for the purposes of evaluating those questions for future use. But that pretty much works out to almost 1.5 minutes per question. For extra cost, there is special testing for candidates for people whose first language is not English. And now the practice exam is free, so we encourage you to take it. I think that's a really great idea. The exam covers the FDA and EPA GLPs, the OECD principles of GLP, and 21 CFR Part 11. We suggest that you read through all suggested material in the candidate handbook. If you haven't seen the candidate handbook yet, we can provide a link or some hints as to where to get it. Know the regulations. The preambles will help understand the expected interpretation of the applicable regulations. I think that's speaking in particular to the FDA and EPA GLPs. Answer the questions based on the most conservative approach to what the regulations indicate. So this is important. We bring this up all the time. This exam is basically on the regulations and guidances. And so it's whatever the strictest interpretation that would be. If you can go answer based on a word for word interpretation, that's what you should do. This might be different from what you do at your company. It might be different from what you believe best practices are. That's not the point of this exam, right? The exam is on the regulations, so remember that. There are a lot of questions and not a lot of extra time. So we recommend read through each question carefully. If the question looks really long or complicated, skip it and come back to it later. Right? So start with the ones that you can answer immediately. Watch your time. After the first hour, you should be through 50 to 55 questions, right? So pace yourself. And if you're unsure, then guess. A wrong answer is the same as no answer. And for the question comes up quite often, well, if we skip it, how do we know which ones we skip? Well, in past years at least, we know that the exam interface lets you, it will flag all the questions you haven't answered yet. So it should be really easy to go back through a second time and only look at the questions you haven't answered yet. So don't worry about that. Watch for keywords. These will help you assess which regulation the question is talking about, right? So if you see protocol or study plan, that's a really good hint. Protocol is used in the American GLPs, and study plan is used in the OECD guidances. Control article versus reference item. Reference to pesticides always or usually means the EPA. Reference to multi-site studies usually means OECD. Things like that. Apply your logic. Most questions have two answers that are clearly correct. Clearly incorrect, right? So it should be easy for you to either by process of elimination or knowing right off the bat. Okay, so On to our next one. If you, I'm just going to try and bring up the chat because I see there are chats here, but I don't actually see what they are.
Hey Brandon, it was just a quick
Yeah.
question about the 15 questions that are not scored. So they wanted to know. So I basically said it means the grade is only based on 150 of the 165 questions. And those 15 are essentially extra questions that they put in there to test how they score, like to test how well things are being responded to, so that way it allows them to assess some questions that they're not sure are clear, or potentially new suggested ones, newly developed ones, and they want to see how well they score before actually incorporating it as part of the formal exam question. So they do generate those questions. If there's only one correct, yes, there is only one correct answer. So thank you for that question. There's only one correct answer. Quite often there's two that potentially could be. And that's why we say, don't think about what you do in your day-to-day. Go back to the strictest sense of the regulations. What do the regs say? So I'll use an example. If you're in the room, it's an ocular study. The technician is going to be dosing ocular and was telling you, oh yeah, been a crazy week. My kids both have pink eye at home and this and that. And you kind of like, oh, this is not a good idea. So what do you do? So logically, you'd probably say, tell the tech going, you can't do this. But as QA, your requirements are to report to the study director. So you probably would still tell them not to do anything. And but you're based on the regulations, you want to communicate your observation to the study director. So that's kind of an example. So it's not necessarily just what would you do in this situation, is what do the regs explicitly say you have to do. And in the regulations, while we all, typically if QA sees something about to go wrong, part of our just common sense and the way that our companies probably want us to run is to stop that mistake before before it becomes an actual mistake. Whereas under the regulations, it never actually says QA should stop any mistakes before they happen, right? So that's the kind of thing you have to think back. What do the regs say that QA has to do, or what do the regs say the study director has to do, or what do the regs say the technician has to do?
I'd just like to add something about those extra 15 questions. In case it wasn't clear, you don't know which of those 15 questions are not scored, right? So you want to answer all 165 questions. So really, in the end, it's just something that is a fact about the test, but it's not going to affect how you answer those questions.
Yes,
Okay.
good point. Thank you, Brandon.
Okay, so let's go on to our topic for today, compliance assessment, inspecting, and what to inspect. So, what do we inspect? Number one, component laboratories. So chemistry, histology, pathology labs, clinical pathology, surgery, microbiology, electron microscopy, and reproductive toxicology. Non-laboratory sites, for example, field sites, test plots, mesocosms, and simulation structures. Storage areas, for example, for test, control, and reference materials, specimen storage, samples, media, feed and bedding, chemicals, reagents, and unused equipment or supplies, to include equipment for low temperature storage, right, in all of these places. Computer facilities and associated controlled procedures and/or systems, including disaster recovery. We want to inspect the protocols or study plans, SOPs, facility records, operating permits, and/or related information in each laboratory or site location, and data under active collection in each laboratory or site collection as well. We want to look at labeling, for example, samples and specimens, chemicals, reagents, test control and reference items, etc. We want to inspect equipment associated with test systems maintenance. For example, the animal rooms, test plots, aquaria, and study conduct. Equipment maintenance records, calibration and validation records. The archives, including the appropriateness of raw data, including electronic data, for archival storage, retrieval, and environmental control. We want to inspect laboratory or field site that any laboratory or field site that participates in a study, including vendors, contractors, or subcontractors. Storage conditions of test, control, and reference materials and specimens, data, and samples. Okay. So, for the discussion, we're going to go through a few discussion questions. Now, remember, this is not a tutorial. This is a discussion opportunity, a study group. So the more you participate, the better. So let's bring on our first poll. All right. Poll number 1. What differentiates between a phase of a study and a test site? Give you guys a few minutes just to think about your answers. All right, we have our first answer up there. Okay, we have 3 answers. 4, great. Getting a few more. All right, everybody, 30 more seconds. What differentiates between a phase of a study and a test site? Okay, any last minute submissions? Great.
Okay, does anybody want to come off mute and either come off mute and say their response or type in the chat while we wait just to see if we can get this?
I guess let's start with, do you see any hints here as to whether it is EPA, FDA, or OECD? Anybody want to jump on? OECD, great. Yeah, what makes you think that? Because here it says test site, exactly, right? So we're talking about OECD here, and the OECD guidances has a specific guidance for multi-site studies. And what the OECD says for test sites is that it's a location that's geographically or organizationally distinct, and that the test site has a principal investigator that's assigned to act on behalf of the study director at the test site. Very good. Study phases are monitored in accordance with the test facility's policies. That's an interesting point. A phase of the study may be overseen by scientific experts at the testing facility, but this is still under control of the study director, right? And a test site might undersee one or more phases of a study as well. Now, whether the test facilities policies come into play or not is a matter of I guess, the contractual agreement between the test site and the test facility. But what's important here is that the study director remains the single focus of the GLP study control. A phase is conducted in a test site or a test facility, while the test site conducts the phase with a principal investigator for the test facility where the study is conducted with the study director. Right. So the principal investigator is acting on behalf of the study director, right? Whereas a study phase is just the general idea of a phase of a study, and that might happen at one or more test sites or at the test facility. Okay. I'm still not sure what happened with that that test, that poll.
Yeah, let's continue for this next one without it.
Okay.
Lydia, just to respond to your comment, I'm trying, but it's asking for a password and logging, and so it's now sending me a code to confirm my login.
I'm so sorry. I also am not sure what happened. Normally, when the poll goes out, either the host or the non-host will see a link that says view detail when sharing, and that will take you to a page in Zoom that you may need to log in to view that shows those results.
Yeah, I just have relaunch poll and share results, and then the share results just says you're viewing the poll results shared by host, it says. So I think it still doesn't think I'm the host.
Yeah, I clicked on your link, Lydia, and it said you don't have access. You are not the host. You don't have access. Kind of love Zoom and
Sincere apologies for these technical issues. I just reclaimed host to see if I could do anything.
No worries. For now, we'll put the answers in the.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Nabia says they can wait. I could see the answer. Okay, so maybe we can.
You're probably the host.
Yeah.
Oh, Carla was the first one on screen. So, okay, maybe Carla has. Let's just put the stuff in the chat for today.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let's carry on. What are some aspects to check when auditing the archives? All right, so this time let's just put your answers in the chat, and these are worth discussing. Please don't worry about getting the answer right or wrong. We're really just looking to discuss and talk about why one might work or one might not for the purposes of testing. So what are some aspects to check when auditing the archives? Limited access and security? Yeah, absolutely. What would you want to see about the access list? Organization of records, right? You do want to see records organized well. Who has access to their titles? Environmental control. If it was an archive of yeah, humidity or temperature. especially if the archives contained something that that was temperature sensitive, right? The archivist needs to be responsible. That's a great answer. Does it meet SOP requirements for access? Anyone other than the archivist, I assume. Yeah. Training record, yeah. Yeah, do they have some form of security limiting access, right? Those are all really great answers.
Sounds good.
Easily retrievable. Fantastic. Right. So the FDA GLPs specifically talk about indexing the contents of the archives, right? And that the index, I saw a little bit earlier on, that the index should be the index should be indexed by test article, right? So basically, if an inspector were to come and say, I want to see record X for this particular test article, you need to be able to pull that within a timely manner. What is backup? What is the backup procedure of electronic documents? That is a good point. Now, the FDA GLPs, again, I don't believe says anything about backup procedure of electronic documents, though Part 11 does. And so these kinds of things might very well come into scope. So let's see. The requirements for the archives, of course, are listed in the FDA GLPs Part 5819A and the OECD Part 2 in 10 sections. Sorry, OECD document number 1 in Part 2 sections 10, 10.2, and 10.3, and that covers a limited access to the archived area, that you need to have an archivist designated. The material must be easily retrieved. It must be indexed. Monitoring of the archive area must be monitored to ensure the conditions minimize deterioration of documents or specimens. So we saw something about environmental control. That could be very important, but really the key thing about the regulations is that they talk about minimizing deterioration. They don't specifically outline exactly how you do that. Right, so that might become an issue or something to think about when you're deciding between two correct-looking answers. Okay. What would be necessary for IT's backup of electronic records to be considered an archive? It's related to that last question, isn't it? Let's say that you're doing an inspection of the archives, and when you ask about electronic records, the archivist says, well, IT does a regular backup of all our systems, right? Does that count as the archives? What would you look for to see if that backup is the archives? Under control of the archivist, right? Many of the things that we've already talked about, right? We need to make sure that it's secured. Good job. Any of the other things we've discovered? Location, records, and list of documents archived. So some way it must be indexed and retrievable. Very good. Yeah. right? You're a backup isn't always particularly, it's not designed all the time anyway. It's not usually designed to be easily retrievable and easy to find records within it, right? And a disaster recovery plan. I think that that comes under the minimizing deterioration, minimizing any danger to the records, and I agree with that, right? So a backup by itself does not guarantee meeting the archiving requirements, right? We want archivist responsibility. We want retention times to be met, right? Quite often, a backup gets overwritten after a certain amount of time, right? So it may not meet the archives that way. We want to make sure that it's minimizing deterioration and that you can find and retrieve records in a timely manner. Okay. Also, the archives should have specific reference to other locations, right? So when you have something like an electronic archives, the FDA GLPs specifically require that anything that's archived in another location is referenced within the archive somehow. Okay, great. All right, our fourth question. How should solutions used in a GLP study be labeled? Are there any other records required for solutions? Great. Identity, concentration, storage requirements, and expiry date. Right. Deteriorated or outdated reagents and solutions should not be used. Very good. I think everybody's got these pretty much. Now, are there any other records required for solutions? A retest date. I know that retest dates are used quite often. I don't think the phrase retest date actually appears, at least not in the FDA and EPA GLPs. Does it talk about retest anywhere in the OECD guidances, Sherry? You know off the hand? No, I don't think
I'm
so.
not Sherry, but no. I should pay attention.
Right, I guess you're right. That is another documentation that you might want. Either the freezer or fridge might require qualification, or it might require temperature monitoring or something like that, tracking records. So the OECD GLPs also state in 4.4 that information concerning source, preparation date, and stability should be available for solutions, right? And that, of course, wouldn't appear on the label, but you do need to have that kind of supporting information in the records. And I agree. Safety information like MSDS is necessary, but it is not mentioned, at least with regards to solutions in the GLPs. And quite often, a solution that you're making, the ingredients might have an MSDS, but the solution may not. So, yeah. All right. Number 5. An inspector conducts an audit of the formulations department in their storage area. What are some of the things, so this is a formulations department storage area. What are some things that the inspector is going to look for? They're going to look for any particular documentation. What are some things that the inspector does not want to see that, for example, they should write up as a citation? Okay, that's a great point. And how are you going to know if the reagents or solutions are expired? Reception and mixing in separate areas. So adequate separation. What else would you want to separate in a formulations area for a GLP study? What would you like to ensure separation for that is really emphasized in the GLPs? Documentation for acquisition and disposition. True, that might be in the formulation storage area. So labels, right? Properly labeled. You want everything in there to be properly labeled. You want to make sure there are certificates of analysis for where appropriate. Test systems are in a separate area. So separate from what? What is it that you want to separate here? Right? So the test systems, you want to preclude them from contamination, right? And especially preclude them from contamination with any of the control or reference articles, right? Yeah, absolutely. Very good. All right, so we've got adequate separation. We've got clear labeling of material and compliant labeling of the material. We want to make sure that they're being stored in the correct conditions, right? So, and that there are certificates of analysis and so on to support appropriate storage. You want to check that there's proper temperature records being used so that they're being stored in the right way. Yeah, absolutely. Safety is something that's necessary. Proper PPE is necessary. Now, the GLPs tend to talk about safety in terms of bringing it up in the protocol rather than in particular. It doesn't really talk about it in particular when it comes to handling things, but I think it is an important aspect that will come into play. And of course, for documentation, we want to see preparation records, C of A's, and other documentation to support the materials that are being used in there, right? Plus validation or temperature controls and the documentation of those controls to support material storage, expiry, and any other applicable information. So what things do you not want to see? We already saw expired materials, right? You don't want to see any possible contamination. You don't really want to see, equipment out of calibration. You don't really want to see messy or disorganized storage areas, right? Unlabeled items, for sure. You do not want to see those kinds of things. Great. Equipment used without calibration. Yes. Fantastic. Okay. Any more questions about these discussion questions? All right. Well, let's move on to some practice questions. I think we still have a few minutes here. All right. So for these are closer to what you're going to see in the exam. And for these, I'd like you to put your answers, just A, B, C, or D, into the chat if you can, and we'll see if we can get everybody to come to a consensus, and we'll talk about the answer. Okay. So for the first one, a sponsor company conducts a field efficacy study. The study personnel arrive for the experimental start date, and the QAU arrives for the in-life audit. All required equipment is shipped to the site to coincide with the testing. The GLP balance, required for weighing test substance, arrives at the field site damaged beyond repair. At the same time, a second working non-GLP qualified balance arrives safely, intended to be used for development work. What should the QAU recommend? Select one. A, the study director proceeds with the study, performing a daily calibration of the working balance using GLP certified weights with proper bracketing. The study director proceeds with the study, performing a daily calibration of the working balance using GLP certified weights with proper bracketing, documents the use of the unqualified balance as a GLP and a protocol deviation in the raw data, and brings the deviation forward on the compliance page of the final report. The study director amends the protocol to include the use of a non-GLP balance. The study director proceeds with the study, but documents the lack of using a GLP qualified balance as a deviation in the raw data and on the compliance page of the final report, and includes an impact statement. Okay, we have a few votes for option D. And a couple of votes for option B. Very good. Okay. Right. So D is the most conservative, and B is best practice and mitigates non-compliance as best as possible. So first of all, we've got maybe a hint here as to which of the GLPs we're talking about now. Can anybody say? Interesting. What makes you think that it's OECD? So for me, the first things that I would see is A, it's a field efficacy study, right? So that says to me that it's probably environmental. And B, it talks about protocol, at least in the answers it talks about protocol. So I think I would go with EPA GLPs.
Yeah, and there's also QAU, which is the Quality Assurance Unit, and in OECD, it's actually called the Quality Assurance Program. So all those subtle little terminologies. So I would agree that it's EPA, potentially FDA, but most likely EPA.
Right.
And test substance. There we go.
Test substance. Very good. Yeah, so we do have a bunch of hints here. So, okay, so we've got votes for B and D. So what's the difference here? So B, in B, the study director proceeds with the study, performing a daily calibration of the working balance using GLP certified weights with proper bracketing. So to me, I think that I don't like the use of GLP certified weights. I'd ask what that actually means, because it's certainly strange language that doesn't appear in the GLPs, but documents the use of the unqualified balance as a GLP and a protocol deviation in the raw data, and brings the deviation forward on the compliance page of the final report. And D, the study director proceeds with the study, but documents the lack of using a GLP for qualified balance as a deviation in the raw data and on the compliance page of the final report, and includes an impact statement. So here's the answer. So the answer given is B. So why is that? If we look at the EPA GLPs, and then we see that there's a requirement for equipment used in the generation, measurement, or assessment of the data, and equipment used for facility environmental control shall be of appropriate design and adequate capacity to function according to the protocol, and shall be suitably located for operation, inspection, cleaning, and maintenance. So I think what they're saying here is that this is a GLP deviation, and also a protocol deviation. And I think that what we have here is an assumption that the protocol talked about the kind of balance that was going to be used here. And so that's why they're saying that it's both a GLP and protocol deviation. Would you agree with that, Sherry?
It would, I think it would depend on exactly, it is a little bit limited information,
Yeah.
but,
I think the part here is that part D just talks about the lack of using a GLP qualified balance as a deviation in the raw data and on the compliance page. So sorry about that. And on the compliance page. So we can choose B over D because B actually points out that it is a GLP deviation, whereas D just says that it's a deviation, that it's going to be logged in the raw data.
yeah, I think this is a perfect example of sometimes there are going to be some short sightings, so you do have to kind of assess, read between the lines sometimes, and it doesn't specifically say that the protocol said that this would, but we would probably need to assume that if the sponsor was providing the equipment, is it the sponsor providing the equipment? Oh, a sponsor company. So if they're shipping a piece of equipment, it's kind of expected that it, or that it's a GLP study, you're going to use GLP equipment. So that's been calibrated, maintained, etc. So whether it's specifically a protocol deviation, we wouldn't necessarily know. But I think with everything else in there.
I just spotted another clue too.
Mm-hmm.
In B, it says documents the use of the unqualified balance as the deviation, whereas in D, it says a GLP qualified balance. So what is GLP qualified versus
Right.
something that's unqualified?
Yeah, again, that speaks to me that they must have an SOP, or they would have to have an SOP defining what GLP qualified meant, I guess. Again, it's that, Is that a clue? Maybe it is. Okay, so let's move on to this. But again, I think what this highlights here is really we want to choose the most appropriate answer, the one that seems most detailed in terms of the requirements of the GLPs, right? And the EPA GLPs require a compliance, require any GLP deviations in the compliance page, and they talk about GLP and protocol deviations. So those are two separate things, whereas Part D doesn't specify which kind of deviation it is. So I think that's why B would be the more appropriate answer.
Yeah, and D mostly because it says they address the deviation in raw data and on the compliance page of the final report. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the question is, why wouldn't you try and do the calibrations to sort of circumvent your deficiency? But I think this is a perfect example, though, as we all saw, majority of the folks felt it was either B or D, and that's kind of what you're going to get. Nabia, yeah, it depends. Sometimes you will have longer questions like this. They're not all going to be like this. And this is the one that you take a quick read through and you're like, oh, this is a long one. I'm running out of time. Mark it and then go ahead and then come back to it later. You don't want to spend 15 minutes on the one question
because it's worth exactly the same number of points as the one you can answer right away.
Exactly.
Right? So, right. Yeah, hesitating between both B and D. In the end, you might need to make a value judgment. What I would do is just kind of, with an imaginary pencil, just tick off all the things that you know are in the GLPs and look for which things are either extra or missing, right? And then choose the one that was most appropriate. So.
All right, I have to jump off because I have another training. Good job, everyone. Thanks, Brendan. Doesn't mean you guys still have 10 more minutes, but I have to go, and hopefully we'll see most of you again next week at next week's session. Take care.
Sherry.
Bye.
Thanks, Sherry. To be honest, I think that the questions that are on the exam are tend to be less confusing than this particular example is. So, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. But again, remember that these are worth just as much as the one you can answer right away. All right, question 2. In conducting a study audit, the study records should be reviewed for quality to ensure that data are attributable, legible, contemporaneous, or original. In addition, which of the following is the most important characteristic of study records? Select one. Concision, verifiability, traceability, or accuracy. C, traceability. C, traceability. D, accuracy. C, traceability. See, right. Now, this is really very interesting now because can anybody say what is it that they're listing? Do you know the acronym that
You almost said it.
Sorry?
You almost said it.
Yep. Alcoa, right? So they're listing Alcoa, which basically the FDA inspectorate came up with to list what the important aspects of data integrity of records of regulated records, right? So as part of Alcoa, what's the missing one here? It's D, accuracy, right? However, over the years, Alcoa has changed. We've added more, right? We've added, over the years, we call it Alcoa Plus or Alcoa Cacacia, and we added Alcoa plus CCEA, and I'm not going to say off the top of my head what those mean, and that's the EU added those, and just in the last year or two, they also added traceability. So now traceability is part of what's considered important characteristics of regulated records. However, here, I think I would just assume they're looking for what's the missing part of the original 5 in Alcoa. Because if we do not have traceability, we cannot reconstruct study. You're absolutely right. It is very important. And it has been added as a separate, I mean, something like traceability comes into play, you know, as a combination of the other original 5. I think most of the added ones can be taken as something that comes out of the original 5. But again, here they're looking for what's the missing one out of Alcoa? And that's D, accuracy, right? Right. So that's the so losing it is absolutely and that's one of the CCEAs is enduring, E for enduring. So that was added. So yes, the answer is accuracy here. So they're looking for the final one in Alcoa. Okay, but it might be worthwhile, first of all, remembering the original 5 Alcoa, right? Because any question older than a few years old will that talks about Alcoa will look for these particular 5: attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate, right? But it might be worth also looking at the other one, CCEA. And here's the answer, D, accuracy. All experimental data, including observations of unanticipated responses of the test system, are accurately recorded and verified. And 35B3 says, inspect each non-clinical laboratory showing the integrity of the study, written properly signed records, and any problems found which are likely to affect study integrity shall be brought to the attention of the study director and management immediately. So, so this is this second one shows where just the concept of data integrity comes in, and Alcoa are the considered the root parts of data integrity. Right? So this is the sorry, did you mean question 1? Like that question? Okay. And here with the answer. Okay? All right. Now we've got 3 minutes left. Let's do a quick treatment of sample question number 3. In the OECD GLPs, the principal investigator is responsible for, select 1. I'll let you read the rest and give your answers. Right, everybody's got it, right? So so here we're looking at process of elimination, right? Ensuring that their delegated phase of the study is conducted in accordance with the principles of good laboratory practice. That's the key things there are that the delegated phase is conducted in accordance to GLPs, right? Conducting process-based inspections, of course, we can eliminate that because that's QA's job. Approving the study plan, amendments, deviations, and final report in place of the study director. We know that C doesn't work. Why is that? Because the study director always remains the central point of control of the study. Whatever the PI does for the study director for that phase still gets study director oversight. So they're not doing these things in place of the study director. So that's why we can eliminate C. And D, ensuring the sufficient number of qualified personnel, appropriate facilities, equipment, and materials are available for the timely and proper conduct of their phase of the study. Whose job is that for D in the case of a multi-site study? That would be management, right? The test site management, absolutely. All right, so that's our study time for now. Any other pressing questions before we go until next week? Great. All right. Well, until next week, thank you guys for your participation, and have a great week. Bye now.